The Quiet Man. Oh, The Quiet Man. It won the prize of Worst Game of 2018 in my Worst Games of 2018 video recently, so here's a more detailed explanation as to why. As said in that video, I truly do believe that there was a legitimately good game concept here. Games have gone for the no words approach before and worked well, so it's entirely possible to make a game that's all show don't tell. I use Journey as an example for this. A game that never utters a single word, yet is packed full of emotion, and I highly recommend anyone who has never tried it to try it. But what separates Journey's method of storytelling to that of The Quiet Man is that Journey's story is pretty simple to follow. It's simple, yet effective, but because it's simple and easy to follow, there are no issues in understanding what's going on. The Quiet Man, on the other hand, does not offer a simple yet effective story. Well, the story may be effective, but because it's not simple, it's almost impossible to follow because, as said, it's all muted out. What the fuck? The Quiet Man is essentially a short film that's interrupted by fight scenes, most of the story being told through live action cutscenes, while the gameplay can be described as a poor man's Batman Arkham style game, but we'll get to the gameplay later on. First, the story. The story follows the deaf or possibly mute protagonist, there's certainly room to make an argument there, who's trying to steal Leonardo DiCaprio's look from Romeo and Juliet, but actually looks more like how Matt Damon was portrayed in Team America. So from this point on, I'm just going to refer to him as Matt Damon. Now, I'm going to have to back up a little bit here, because usually at this point in any rant video, I go on to say what the main character does, what the setting is, the whole point of the game's plot. However, I can't do that here, because despite there being a fully written story in this game, with several characters, all with their own backstories and histories, their own personalities and agendas, I can't tell you any of that because... wait for it. Here it comes! The entire game is muted. Well, not the entire game, mind you. Only the really super important parts of the game aren't muted, such as when he goes up to the hot dog guy near the start. And I can hear some people at home watching this right now angrily destroying their keyboards in response to what I just said with the following argument. The whole point of The Quiet Man is to play it twice. Once while it's muted, and then once again in New Game Plus or whatever, where the sound is back on. The idea being that the first time round, you're left to make up your own mind what's going on in the story, while the second time round is meant to destroy that perception you had of the story so far, as it turns out you were completely wrong about what was happening. And to those of you who are saying this, I have the following words from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 3, verse 15, to say in response. Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "I tell you most solemnly, shut the fuck up. Because if you're going to pull this second playthrough crap on me, then sit your ass back down, because that shit was patched in after the game came out. That's right, it was added in at a later date. In other words, it wasn't there when the game was originally launched." Now, you can argue that's cool because the devs had always intended to add this in at a later date anyway, but again, no, I'm not going to accept that as a justifiable practice. When a company releases an entire game, they meant for that game to be experienced as a whole. Having to add that patch in later on means one of two things. Either they realised their mistake or noticed the backlash and added it in response, or they always intended for this patch to be put in at a later date, which means that when they released their game initially, it wasn't a finished product. So if you had spent your money on it back then, you were paying for an incomplete title, and neither of those situations sit well for me, with the latter classing it as an early access game even though they never advertised it as such. So no, I'm not accepting these excuses. As far as I'm concerned, the first playthrough is the intended playthrough, and that method of storytelling just flat out doesn't work. All I got from it was that Matt Damon works as possibly a hitman to take out a load of black people who are threatening a girl he has a crush on who looks like his dead mum. Oh, and his boss possibly hates him. And then there's also something about a plague doctor, and how a cop is like a father figure to him, / maybe not, I don't know. Sure, the second playthrough will clear all of this up for you, but as I've said, the first playthrough is the intended playthrough. Why make us go through another playthrough to find out what was happening in the first when you could just tell us what was happening in the first? It's not like it'd be a massive revelation because no one has a fucking clue what's going on in the first playthrough anyway. I also feel really bad for the actors in this game. The acting isn't too bad, don't get me wrong, though I will say that late 90s PC Gaming called and said they wanted their cutscenes back. But I just thought that if I was one of these actors, I'd be pissed if I'd been hired to play a role in someone's game, only for the developers to fucking mute the entire thing and lock my spoken lines behind a patch. Hey everyone, check out this game! I played a character in it. What? They muted out all of my lines. They muted all of it out. Well, what was the point in that then? Keeping up with the story is next to impossible, and it kind of feels like a massive barrier to get through in order to get to the second playthrough. And even if the story is a bit better the second time round, that still doesn't excuse the awful combat system. You know, what I've talked about so far, I just see that as stupid. In fact, someone summed up this game to me recently that just captures this game perfectly. This game is dumb. I can't put it any better than that myself, this game is dumb. But while the story itself does a massive disservice, the combat just cements it as a failure. The controls are poorly explained through neon lights in the menus, and some of these lights will just show you what your character may look like, what he's doing when you try hitting that button, but doesn't always explain it, instead of actually telling you what that mechanic does. There's a takedown move that you can use, presumably after you've thrown so many punches, but I only found that out by accident, and not by what the control screen was telling me. Enemies ragdoll quite often and in hilarious ways. Changing between targets is very awkward to do, as it seems like just wants to focus on the nearest target and just stay focused on him until he's down. The combat is extremely detestable and stiff, yet it counts for 100% of the gameplay. In fact, in later sections of the game, the combat becomes very cheap, forcing the player to exploit the hell out of it just to get a win. It's not about how good a fighter you are, and more about how much you can abuse the mechanics. All actual gameplay sections outside of cutscenes is just combat, and it's not very good combat either. It really does remind me of a Batman Arkham game with its light attacks, heavy attacks, takedowns, dodges and counterattacks, but these games, though putting the back gadgets to the side obviously, you can feel the impact of each hit you make. The Quiet Man, on the other hand, doesn't look anywhere near as brutal as an actual fight would look like, and some of the fighting animations are just funny. Even though you've hit an enemy, your fist never actually touches them, as if this is really a performance and not a real fight. I'm also going to have a go at some of the design choices in this game, because there were some sections that kind of baffled me. Such as how you'll get a very long live action cutscene, followed by an in-game graphics cutscene, then you're given control back, so you walk a few steps forward, only for another very long cutscene to be triggered. Well, what was the point of giving me control in the first place? What was the point of that part? Why not just add walking into the room in a cutscene instead of making me walk a few steps forward to then trigger another cutscene? I noticed this a few times and it just baffled me. Oh, and I can't finish up the story without talking about the ending. If this game was trying to be serious all the way through, then it lost the plot right at the end. As if the writers were trying their damnedest to keep it serious all the way through, but by the time they got to the end, the urge to make it fucking mad clearly got the better of them. So, has a punch up with George. I can't remember their name, so I'm just making it up. Though I do know that the girl was called Lala. Yep. But even though you win that fight, you still end up getting capped several times. So you're dead. End of, right? Well, yes, that's right. Right up until the point when you're not, when comes back to life, only this time with superpowers. Like, seriously, what the fuck was up with that part? And then after presumably killing George, he loses his powers, and then his mum slash not mum slash lover, don't ask, okay, who was tied up somewhere nearby, unties herself somehow and runs up to you. Then you beat up your not dad, who's also a cop, so that's a federal law broken right there, and then the game ends. But not before forcing you to sit through an unskippable cutscene, all of them are skippable by the way, in which your mum sings a song. When this part started, I thought, oh, okay, this must be the credits. Alright then, fair enough. But no, this isn't actually the credits. It's just some fucking song that I can't be bothered to hear. Why did they make this unskippable? In fact, why did they make all the cutscenes unskippable if they were muted out in the first place? No! Watch this part, okay? It's really important! Turns the volume down to mute. Geniuses! Well done, guys. Anyway, that's all there is to say about the gameplay. In fact, there's not really much gameplay to be found here. There are some fight scenes. That's it. The rest of the game is either live-action cutscenes or in-game cutscenes, and in fact, these cutscenes take up most of the game. I'd say a good 80% of the game, in fact. Hence why I've been talking mostly about that in this video so far. And as for the second playthrough itself, what's revealed isn't all that great. The cop/father figure is a jerk, is working for a crime syndicate, George is your childhood friend who might have been the one to accidentally kill your mum, who wasn't your lover at this point. And as for who the bad guy is, all I'm gathering from this is that the real villain of this plot is the hot dog vendor near the start. I mean, think about it. He's the only one who really had a spoken part in the entire first playthrough, and he's the one who put you on your path to begin with, and he's the least suspicious character out of all of them. If this was a Scooby-Doo episode, which I'm pretty sure it is, then he'd be the mastermind. No question, no argument! And going back to it, I'd also argue that having the whole game muted isn't simulating what it'd be like for someone with a hearing disability anyway. Does speak in certain cutscenes, suggesting that he isn't really deaf. He can also understand people perfectly when they talk, so that'd either mean that he can hear them anyway, or at the very least he can lip read. So again, if we're supposed to be hearing this game's plot from his perspective, then we should at the very least be getting subtitles, because even though he's supposedly deaf, he can understand everyone fine. In fact, in a flashback that takes place when his mum dies, he can speak before she dies, but can't after, suggesting that the trauma has either made him lose his hearing or his speech. However, he can immediately use sign language. When the f*** did that happen? Am I missing something here? This game is riddled with inconsistencies. It's not an artistic game, it's not powerful, it's just pretentious, and how f***ing pretentious can you get? Just because you've muted the story to resemble what it'd be like for a deaf person to experience these events, doesn't mean that you're making a powerful statement. Hell, if I were to mute this video during the conclusion section as a way of showing you what it'd be like for a deaf person, would you still get my message? Would you still know what I was saying? No, you wouldn't, but that's fine, because in a few days' time, I'll post a new video which will include these parts that you didn't get to hear, and only then will the grand mystery be solved, and you all better thank me for it. Now, this game was made by Human Head Studios, and as it turns out, this is not the first game by them that I've played. They actually made a game quite a while back called Rune, which was a hack and slash set in and around Norse mythology. Ironically, I started off liking that game before absolutely hating it by the end, so your track record with me isn't going too well so far, Human Head. But at least that game mostly consisted of gameplay and not live action cutscenes. And the sound was on. Incidentally, before I finish up, I introduced a new feature to these rant videos a while back called True Review's Best Line, but then totally forgot about it afterwards, so that's getting brought back. So here is... True Review's Best Line. True Review's Best Line. In conclusion,